The John Daversa Podcast.
I really preferred to try to make a music that truly represented the era that I'm in. You know, I wanted to, there are no rules in jazz, but, how you get initialized is important. What the older guys say to you when you're young about the purpose of jazz, the aim of jazz. And when I was coming up, it was like you have to be able to find a style where everybody knows it's you within the first few notes, okay? You have to take the music somewhere where if people hear it 100 years from now, they know exactly when this thing happened, So that was how I got initialized.
Every once in a while, you get to sit down with one of your musical heroes, and Marcus Miller is that for me. He has played on so many pivotal albums that have defined how I think about music, how I arrange music, how I produce music, how I play music. And what an amazing opportunity and gift to be able to sit down and ask him questions about all of that, all of those influences. And I found out that I've been mispronouncing Amandla all this time, the Miles Davis record that he wrote and produced. It's Amandla, not Amandla. So thank you, Marcus, for spending the time with me here. This is my conversation with the incomparable Marcus Miller. All right, Marcus Miller.
What's happening, man?
Hey, I got to tell you something up front.
Okay.
And that is, when I was in my early 20s, I got into a bad accident because of you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and
What?
basically you owe me like $1,500 for my car.
Right.
Because I was driving down the 101 in L.A.
Yeah.
with my 1984 Ford Mustang.
Yes.
With the upholstery coming down. And had a cracked head.
What kind of car is it that only costs $1,500? Yeah.
Well, $1,500 totaled the car, by the way.
Oh.
But
What
I made the mistake, and it had a cassette player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had one of those adapters with the cassette, and it goes to the Sony Walkman with the CDs.
Oh, wow.
And I put in Man with the Horn.
Oh, wow.
And I put on that first track, Fat Time.
Fat Time. Yeah.
And it felt so damn good, Marcus.
Wow.
It felt so good, and I lost my mind, and I rear-ended the person in front of me.
No.
Yeah. But it felt good, and I'm over it, and there's all forgiveness at this point.
Can I pay you an installment?
But
wow.
it's such an honor to have you here, and
Thank you, man.
And you've been an inspiration to so many musicians.
Oh, that's nice, man.
So many musicians.
Thank you.
And I just I'll start to say that my entrance to your artistry and musicianship was Amandla.
Oh, yeah.
And then I kind of worked
your way
back
backwards
and then
forwards. Yeah.
yes, and the composition, the sense of soundscape, and the production. Your producer role, because you were. I put it on again today because I hadn't listened to it for a long time.
Sure.
And I can tell how you were creating these spaces for Miles to be in his, best possible space to bring out the best out of everybody else.
Yeah.
And the same for Kenny Garrett and Joe Sample. And so, and I know that you hear everything. Like you were mentioning a moment ago, I can hear you hearing everything, and I wonder if you would just take me on a little fly on the wall exercise in the making of that record and the time period too.
Well, Amanda was the third record that I did working with Miles. I was in Miles' band as a bass player when he made his comeback in '81, and stayed in his band for a couple of years. Then left to develop more as a composer and a producer. I was working with Luther Vandross and David Sanborn and Aretha Shaka Khan, folks like that. But eventually I got a call from Warner Brothers who said they had just signed Miles. Miles had been on Columbia for years and years. And he finally went to Warner Brothers, and Warner called Tommy LaPuma, was his name. He was one of the VPs at Warner Brothers. He said, "We signed Miles." I said, "You signed Miles?" He said, "Yeah." he said, "You got any music?" And I said, "What's he looking to do?" And he said, "He wants to do something different, very different." And Tommy said, "Can I send you a track that George Duke wrote for him?" And I said, "Sure." And he sent me a track that George Duke had written for Miles, and it had, drum machines and synthesizers and synclaviers and all this stuff. And I'm like, "Whoa, Miles is ready to do this." So I got to writing, and the first thing I wrote was Tutu. I wrote a tune called Portia. Went out to L.A. to play Tommy the demos at Capitol Studios, that round building in L.A., famous building. And anyway, Tommy loved it. He encouraged me to just re-record the demos in the studio with just myself playing all the instruments. Miles came in eventually. It was great to see him. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. And he was very proud to see me kind of growing.
I bet.
We did Tutu, which was very successful and kind of blew some air into Miles in the 80s, because it became like part of the soundtrack of the 80s, with this kind of techno thing. And my attempt with Tutu was to kind of place Miles in the middle of this new landscape, New York and all the technology that was just emerging. I mean, right now it's just part of life, but in 1985, it was very new. Tutu was successful. Then we did a movie score called Siesta, which was the movie people had used Miles and Gil Evans' Sketches of Spain as a temporary music. And they wanted something modern, but with that same flavor. The film had been shot in Madrid, I believe. So we did Siesta, which was really, really beautiful to do. So Amandla, getting to Amandla, that was the third collaboration that we did. And by this time, I'm very comfortable. For Tutu, I put together these tracks, and then I got Miles sitting here, and I'm sitting here, and he's got the trumpet and the microphone, and I have my soprano sax, which is in the same key as Miles's trumpet, so I could play in the melodies and point to the pieces in the music where he should play. But it was really difficult to give him direction because he's Miles Davis, and it was just a little intimidating. But halfway through the recording of Tutu, it started sounding so good that I got comfortable really quickly. So now, I've been through Tutu and Siesta, so now we're really comfortable. Miles is comfortable. I mean, not that he was ever uncomfortable, but I certainly was. And but now it's like, Tutu was cool, but it was just me playing most of the instruments, and now it's time to bring Miles back to kind of like the more music with more musicians. So, but I still started the same way. Yeah. I started doing all the stuff myself, and I was really, my goal was to create a beautiful landscape for him. Imagine like this beautiful, like urban landscape with a valley that goes right through it, and Miles is just walking through it. Stuff is flying by him, harmonies are coming through his legs, but he's just Miles, And so that's what Amandla was. It was crazy because I really took a lot of time with voicings, took a lot of time with sounds, just to create something that could connect Miles to what was happening in the 80s. The 80s was very specific. The 80s were a very specific time and a very specific sound. Everything was gated reverbs, and everything was very quantized. How does Miles fit in with this stuff? And but particularly with the harmonies, I worked really hard to make sure that he was comfortable with the harmonies. And the funny thing is, working with him, he never asked me about a chord change. He said, "What key are we in?" And I said, "Well, this one's an F." Okay. And then he went. I had the music there for him to play the melodies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wrote the melodies out, and he was, he went to Juilliard. He was a great musician, all-around musician. So I wrote the stuff out. He sent me down to he said, "Marcus, go down to the Five and Dime and get me some reading glasses." And I said, "Okay, what's a Five and Dime?" But sure enough, he went to the first store, like the department store. And the first thing you see, which is something that I never noticed before, was this tree with reading glasses on it. I'd never even picked that up before. Anyway, I brought him a pair. And he put them on, and he just read, he'd read the melodies. It's funny, the first thing he said to me when he first read something that I wrote for him was, because I'm writing it out and I'm trying to make it sound just like Miles' phrasing. So everything's behind the beat and everything's tied over to the next bar. He said, man, don't write it behind the beat, because if you write it on the beat, I'm going to play that behind that and I'm going to end up in the next bar. So just play it straight. Write it straight and I'll do what I do. So I said, okay. So one of the songs on Amandla is Mr. Pastorius. So first I wrote it down, boom, boom, bee, da, dum, da, right?
You wrote it out like that, back phrase?
He said, man, you better put that stuff on the beat. So I wrote, bum, bum, boom, boom, bum, boom, boom, bum. And sure enough, that's when he was free to do it the way he did it, you know? It was beautiful. Mr. Pastorius also was a tune I clearly wrote it for Jocko. And it's cool to be down here at the University of Miami, where Jocko spent a lot of time. This is old stomping grounds. But I wrote it because Jocko had passed. And I really wanted to have a nostalgic feel to it, right? Because you're remembering all the cool times I got to spend with Jocko. And it'd have been really cool if we went into swing. Yeah. But Miles had made it clear to me and everybody else in the band, I don't do that anymore, you know. Why not, Miles? It's like putting on my old clothes, you know. Okay. So I said, all right. So I'm writing Mr. Pastorius, and I said, well, what we'll do is we'll do like a halftime shuffle. When it's time for Miles to blow, when it's time for him to solo. So he's playing the melody, and I had orchestrated it out and created a thing for him, and he played the melody. And because of the changes, it looks like a standard tune. You know what I mean? It's like A, B, A form, and it's going to go back to the top. And sure enough, when he got to the bottom, without thinking, he goes to the top and starts playing the changes. I was just going to go to a vamp because he didn't seem like he enjoyed playing changes anymore. So I went to a vamp. I was supposed to go to a vamp. But Miles, when he got to the end, just instinctively, he went back up to the top and started playing off the changes. And then he goes to me like that. And I'm like, did he really just give me the 4/4 sign? You know? So I started walking. And he just played chorus after chorus after chorus. I didn't say anything. I didn't look at him, you know, because I didn't want him to realize what he was doing. And he played so many choruses that we were still recording on tape at the time. And the engineer was giving me we're running out of tape signal, you know, because that would happen from time to time when you played too long, or if this was song number 2 that you recorded on the same reel of tape. So I'm like, oh, man, because he's still playing. So, man, the next thing I know, the engineer, whose name was Bill Schnee, Bill has a team of assistants there with the new reel. And when the reel ran out, it was like a Formula One pit stop.
No way.
And then they went, we're rolling again. You know. So
Are you serious?
So we missed about 4 bars, and I edited it, you know, for the mix. And Miles just kept playing, man. It was really beautiful. And then I called Al Foster, Al the drummer, who was in Miles' band in the 70s, and he was also in the band when I played with Miles in the 80s.
He also owes me $1,500 for that group.
Al owes you. Al and I split it, $750 each, you know. But I said, Al, please get your drums and please come down here. You know, he said, what? I said, you got to hear this, you know, Miles is... So Al came and set up his drums, and I said, I'm not playing you anything because I need you to play and just react to what you hear, you know. So he sat the drums, he put on the headphones, and I gave him the signal when to play. First he's listening, and then I said, now. And he starts swinging, and you could just see him go. And then all of a sudden you see tears coming down his eyes, you know, because all of us who played with Miles really wanted to see what it felt like to swing with him. And we had swung a little bit on Man with the Horn, so it wasn't the first time, but he kind of, you know, discouraged you from doing it. And I'm sure a lot of musicians who played with him, you know, it's like a dream to be chosen by him to play in his band, but you know, you wish you could play the stuff that turned you on, you know, when you were young and studying Miles' music, you know. I'm sure, I know when Herbie played with Miles first, he was playing like Red Garland and Wynton Kelly until Miles said, I'm waiting for you to play like you. You know, you're about to get fired. You know, Herbie Herbie said that at one point he just got tired and just started playing what he wanted. And after the show, he wasn't sure what Miles would think. And Miles said, I was waiting for that because you were about to get fired, for not playing like I know you can play, So everybody had to go through that with Miles. You love the 60s, but now it's the 70s. And you got to go with him. I love the 50s, 60s, 70s, but now it's the 80s, and we got to find something new. So to have the opportunity to swing with him was really cool, especially because it was a tribute to Jocko, and that seemed appropriate.
I'll share with you just as an audience perspective. I mean, I was probably 16, 17 when I heard that record, and I think it's the last track, right?
It is the
and
last
he's
track.
playing harmon mute through everything with that delay on it, and then open horn.
Yeah.
And it's just such a, talk about that nostalgic thing.
Yeah.
And the sound.
Yeah.
And then when it goes into 4, it's like, no.
Really?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah.
And it all seems, like it's okay.
It's on purpose, yeah.
Yeah. Because even as a trumpet player at that point, it's like, no, I can't play that way because Miles doesn't play that way anymore. Like that was the standard.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, wait,
of course.
It's allowed sometimes.
And when he first came back, as you know, you're a trumpet player, so taking 5 years off with a trumpet, somebody told me, Patrick Stewart, trumpet player, said, if I take 1 day off from practicing, I know it. If I take 2 days off, everybody knows it. So you can't just take 5 years off.
Yeah.
So what I think he did was that harmony mute was like, it gave him support. He didn't have to worry about having such a full-bodied tone, and he got comfortable doing that. But by Amandla, he's been back for like 7 years, 6, 7 years, and he was strong. And when he started playing, he played it open, and you hear his sound. It's beautiful. Oh, yeah. It's full-bodied. It's really really special. Then we did the tune again. We did Mr. Pastorius on television. David Sanborn had a TV show, Night Music, and I got to produce that show. Meaning, I got to invite the special guests. So I had Djavan, beautiful Brazilian artist, and we had Miles. And Kenny Garrett was there, and we played Mr. Pastorius after I interviewed Miles a little bit, and he used that open horn again. And it was that was just incredible because now it's real. He's comfortable with it, and, he just played that melody so beautifully. And then Kenny Garrett played a straight alto, which made it very...
Was he playing that straight alto on the record as well?
I think he had just got it, maybe a couple of days before the TV show, and was just trying it out.
And just one more nitpicky question. I'm curious how much was done with the soloist live, because there's so much call and response that you created on that record.
Yes. So what I would do is, because we were layering it, but I would not let Miles hear anything, and we would do the horns together.
Okay.
We would do the horns where, this guy hears that guy. So you hear the horns interacting, and then the rhythm section, because a lot of it was, funk or calypso or African rhythms, so they didn't have to, the most important thing was the groove. Yeah. But with the horns, so it was a real fusion. Yeah. I mean, different.
And some of those things with the bass clarinet too that you're playing, you would do that live with him too, I would imagine. Yeah.
I'd play the soprano with him. I just had the soprano there to show him the melodies. Just to play it with approximate phrasing, so he knew what we're doing. But he, sometimes he would hit me you got to play something, and I'm like, oh man, Miles, this is a Miles Davis record, man. I don't need to be playing any soprano sax. But, he was like that. And with the bass clarinet, which is, I started on the clarinet, the B-flat clarinet, and played it from 10 years old all the way through college. And then I played bass guitar. That was my side instrument that I played outside of school. And so, when I became a professional, doing sessions in New York, put the clarinet away. But at one point, I saw treble clef music and realized my fingers are still moving to the clarinet fingerings when I see treble clef. It's a shame to just abandon that instrument, even though I can't see a place for the B-flat clarinet in the music that we were doing at the time. So I said to myself, I'm going to get me a bass clarinet and see what that's like. And my wife overheard me, called my mom, and she and my mom got in touch with my junior high school music teacher, Mr. Guarino, and they found the bass clarinet and put it under the Christmas tree for me in '85.
That's like the sweetest thing I ever
It was
heard.
just so beautiful. What wasn't beautiful is how I played that bass clarinet that Christmas morning. But I really got into it, and it's such a different instrument from the bass. And I played it for Miles, and he loved it, and there was a precedent. Benny Maupin used to play bass clarinet for Miles on those 70s records. So it was beautiful. And Miles' solos, some of them were so beautiful and melodic that I wanted to point out on one piece. I wanted to point out how beautiful and like a composition his solos were. So I learned the solo and doubled it on the bass clarinet 2 octaves below. Bum, boom, 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 bum, boom, bum, boom, boom. It's on a piece called Hannibal. And he was like, what the hell is that? Because it sounds like a snake that's following him, behind him.
I thought so. I thought that might have been the case in that, and then you repeated, right?
Yes. And I played like the whole 8 bars with him. Exactly. And so it became a sound, part of the Tutu era sound for Miles to have a bass clarinet just kind of commenting on stuff, It's funny, man, because I started doing my own gigs and halfway through a 2-hour show, I would pull out the bass clarinet and squeaking and squawking because you can't just pick up a clarinet with a wooden reed and just play it like you've been playing it all along. So it was pretty tough. And Benny Maupin was in the audience at a club called Catalina's in L.A. Benny Maupin was there, and he came up to me and said, "This is going to change your life." And he handed me a plastic reed, right? Doesn't need to be wet when you play it. He said, "Here you go." And I said, "Thanks, man." So I put it on, and that enabled me to pick up the horn whenever I wanted to and play what I needed to play.
You feel like you have less control with it?
No, because I didn't play bass clarinet enough with a wooden reed to know what the control is, and I don't want to because I don't want to realize how limiting it is, But it's fine for me. And I saw Benny a year later at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London, and Benny comes backstage, man. I said, "Man, Benny, that reed you gave me, I'm still playing it. I've been playing it for a year." He goes, "Well, here's another year." And he handed me a new one. So I played Benny Maupin's reeds for like almost 3 years, and then I finally got in touch with Barry. They're the ones who make those particular reeds, and got my own.
Right on.
But it was a very, very cool thing.
So tell us just a little bit more about that mentorship relationship with Miles Davis, because I mean the first record you all did was We Want Miles. I think that was what, 1980 maybe, or before that?
81.
81. Yeah. But what was the first part of the relationship, and when you got to know each other musically and building trust, and then it built into this beautiful collaboration? And I thought about it because you said how proud he was of you, in 1989.
And that's very, very, very much how it was. I did Man with the Horn because Bill Evans, the sax player, recommended me to Miles.
Okay.
And Miles called me, and the first time I met him was when we were recording Fat Time.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So that was before We Want Miles.
That was before We Want Miles, yes. And Al Foster I knew because Al Foster and I used to play with a baritone player named Ronnie Cuber. We used to do straight ahead gigs in the Village. So anyway, Miles, he tried to give us a hard time, all of us, because we were young and, we were all sitting there like, starstruck. So he's cursing us out and doing everything, and it worked because it made everybody comfortable. Oh, this is just, I know these kind of guys, When I grew up, there were so many band leaders who were trying to be like Miles, like giving you conflicting directions, and you finally realize, man, I just gotta ignore this dude and play from my heart, play what I think is right, and let the chips fall, So that's where I got to with Miles. And then he said, "All right now, come to my house tomorrow." So I went to his house the next day, and we hung out and listened to what we had recorded the day before. And man, you played your ass off. He was really cool, And then we went to the studio that day because we were supposed to record again. And he was in a foul mood by the time we got to the studio. And started cursing at Tio Macero, the producer, and left without playing a note. So I could see like the two sides of this guy. You know, he had a beautiful, very sensitive side and a really hard side. And I always suspected, despite what I heard about him, that there had to be a sensitive side. You can't play those ballads as an asshole. You know, I don't think you can reach that kind of emotion without having something really beautiful at your core. You know, so I was lucky because, you know, at the same time that I joined the band, Cicely Tyson, the great, incredible, immortal Cicely Tyson, she was hanging out with Miles. You know, they had been together in the 60s. And Miles said, you know, I had to break up with her because she was too clairvoyant. You know, she could always tell when I did something messed up, you know, and I couldn't get away with nothing. So, but now it's the 80s, 81, 82, and she's back. And Miles, by the time I finished my run as a bass player with Miles, he wasn't doing so hot physically, you know. But Cicely got in there. They eventually got married. And Cicely got in there and just cleaned him up and, you know, made him stop doing whatever he was doing that was messing him up. And by the time I came back for the Tutu sessions, he was in much better shape.
I see.
You know? And so, you know, I caught him at such a great time because, like I said, we were adding Miles's trumpet to a lot of these tracks. So I'm sitting here in the chair. He's sitting right there. He's sitting right there. So I'll write out something. He'll go, that reminds me. And then he'll talk about Charlie Parker or Dexter Gordon or Dizzy or Clark Terry. So he's just telling me all these stories, man. And the engineers are like, when are we going to record? I said, man, maybe never, okay? Because I have to hear all of this. And it was beautiful, man. You know, then after Tutu came out, you know, he'd have me over to the house and he'd show me, this is what Gil showed me. You know, he'd play a voicing and do stuff. And when I first joined his band, he said to me, man, it's been 2 weeks. You haven't asked me how much I'm paying you. And I said, oh, man, I don't care, man. He said, no, man, you got to take care. He's about to give me a lecture on, you know, that he probably gave to a lot of young musicians about being financially responsible and aware. I said, no, man, I got the #1 R&B song on Aretha Franklin right now that I wrote. I got the #3 song with Luther Vandross. I'm doing well. This is my honor, man. I should be paying you, you know. He said, wait, what? I said, yeah, man.
So he didn't know.
I do R&B. I do all sorts of stuff, man. He's like, get out of here. And he was very proud of that, you know. So whenever we had a break and then we got back together, he said, tell me what you've been doing. Who'd you play with, you know? And eventually we got to the point where we'd be in the car and listening to music. And I said, listen to that. That's Janet Jackson. That's Michael's little sister. He said, well, what makes it sound like that? I said, no snare drum, just claps. Get the hell out of here. Write me something like that. You know, he was like that because he was always so curious. And whatever was new, you know, a lot of jazz musicians, that's just new and it's very kind of surfacey, but he always heard the potential in pop music, you know, which is what he did in the 50s when he was playing all those Broadway songs, you know, or, you know, when he recorded that Disney song from Snow White, Someday My Prince Will Come. He could hear the possibilities. If it's a great melody, he could take it from there and show people what could be done, what could happen with these songs, you know. And so he never changed. So now it's 1983, 4, 5, and he's listening, and I'm pointing out stuff. He said, oh, man, you know. So people said he changed, but as far as I'm concerned, he stayed the same. People expected him to reject modern music, but he never did. When he was a kid and he heard Diz and Bird come through with a big band, he was like, that's the baddest, hippest stuff I've ever heard. I got to get some of that. And he eventually, you know, got accepted to Juilliard, told his dad he's going to New York from East St. Louis. He's going to New York to study, you know, classical music at Juilliard, which his father thought was cool. And, you know, he stayed there for, 2 weeks, however long he stayed. And then he found Bird and Diz and hung out with them. But he wanted to be with the new hip stuff.
Yeah.
And he always kind of had an ear for that. You know, some musicians, they find what they can do when they're 23, 24, 25, and they do that for the rest of their life. Nothing wrong with that, you know. And it gets polished and it gets burnished and it gets beautiful and mature, which is cool. But he was he was a guy like, I just want to be part of, of music's evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. That's certainly what I loved him for and still do. That spirit still is
I mean,
very
how
much
courageous
alive.
do you have to be? People talk about, what do you talk about, courageous? How courageous do you have to be? He was like the number one jazz artist in the 1950s. By 59, he was the one. Like you go to Miles' concert, there'd be Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner in the audience, and everybody was dressing like him, everybody's playing like him. And by 61, 62, he had completely said, okay, enough of that. And started a new band. And guess what? The next band came and ended up being as influential with Wayne, Herbie, Ron, and Tony, right? I mean, who does that? Who's done that?
Yeah.
Went to electric music in the 60s, because by 69, he started feeling like he was disconnected. There's no black people in the audience. He's like, man, we're playing in Europe all the time. I got to reconnect, Next thing you know, we got Pete Cozy with a wah-wah pedal and, asking Herbie, Keith Jarrett, Chicory to play Fender Rhodes. That's just who he was,
How does that translate into your music and your career and your philosophy, those influences?
Well, man, I don't really, I'm not really aware of how it seeps in, but it certainly seeps in. I know that people tell me when they see me working with musicians, they say that reminds me of Miles. I don't really know how, but it's like Miles said a lot of things to me that I keep. But the things that really, I think, really affected me was just watching him. Just like a kid watches their parents. The parents are always talking, but the kid watches what you do. And so I saw him interacting with musicians. He was real supportive of the musicians he had in his band. Really wanted them to do their thing. Really wanted them to contribute something original to the music. And I think I might have some of that. And in terms of like evolving, if you listen to a record that I did 20, 30 years ago and you listen to my record now, there's absolutely an evolution, Miles was more like a revolution. He just fired everybody and started a new thing, or whatever happened. People left. And, from record A to record B, it was completely different. But my thing is the evolution is slower. But I'm enjoying it because I've been doing it for so long, So it's just, it's kind of like the same mentality, but it just happens over time.
I see it. I'm going to take you back a little bit more, because I have to ask you about two records that were, I would think, for more of your New York session days. And my dad was a session trumpet player in L.A. for many years. And played on, all those Commodores records.
Oh, wow.
And Billy Preston and like all of those things. And I've asked him about it, or people will tell me, so your dad played on that record. And I said, oh, really? Let me ask him about it. And I'll ask him about it. And he's like, maybe,
remember, right?
It was just, another day. You go through it, and I remember playing in Brick House actually, and he said he'd never heard it before. I said, come on, and so we went all the way through, and I stopped it, and he said, yeah, that could have been me.
So as session musicians, man,
right?
People do that to me all the time, man. Listen to that, and especially the early ones, because the early ones I was doing chameleon bass like most session musicians do. You play what's absolutely appropriate for the song. And then after a while, people started calling me for a very specific thing, so I can recognize myself. But yeah, man, you don't remember. You're doing 4 or 5 a day, especially in New York.
So do you remember Just the Two of Us with Ralph
that was an early one. Yeah, so I absolutely remember Just the Two of Us.
So I mean, I'm curious how that, those parts on that record are so, they're so perfect. And you and Steve Gadd, I'm curious if you remember how Gadd's part evolved, and then booyah, like was that something that you came up with, and the octave displacement after and all of that?
There's an arranger who worked with Ralph MacDonald. Ralph MacDonald was the producer, percussionist. He wrote "Where Is the Love" for Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway. He wrote Mr. Magic for Grover, and he was a co-writer on Just the Two of Us. But his partner was William Eaton, Bill Eaton.
Okay.
And Bill Eaton was Ralph's arranger. And Bill Eaton was a fantastic arranger. He arranged all the jingles, the music for commercials that all the studio musicians in New York did in the mornings. That's what kind of paid our basic fundamental rent.
Okay.
And then we went on to do record dates later on in the day. But Bill Eaton was an arranger. He did the jingles, and he also did stuff for Ralph. And Ralph and his writing partner, Bill Salter, they wrote this tune, Just the Two of Us. And it was originally supposed to be a commercial for the Trinidad Tourist Board, Trinidad and Tobago, the sister islands in the Caribbean, Just the Two of Us. It was like, come take your vacation here.
I never heard that before.
Right?
Wow.
So that's what the tune was originally for. But eventually they decided to do it on Grover Washington Jr. Yeah. So Bill had written out boom, 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 boom. He wrote those notes out. I put the slides in and the phrasing, but it was Bill who wrote it out. And the octave displacement, I think I might have decided, okay, enough of that up here, and it was instrumental. There was no singing.
That was my other question. I wonder if there's a scratch there or not.
Yeah, it's just an instrumental. We were just another instrumental song on a Grover Washington album. And in terms of Steve Gadd, he just played what was appropriate. Dun, dun, dun. And Ralph's engineer had a very specific sound on the bass drum, which was full spectrum. You could hear the click of the beater hitting the skin, and you could hear the fullness. And luckily it was Steve Gadd. His bass drum is so exact that you could put it out front and center like that, and it was
perfect.
It was perfect. And anyway, we recorded the track, Richard T. on the piano, and Eric Gale on the guitar, and Ralph on percussion. And about a month later, I'm walking down Broadway in Times Square. All the studios in New York at that time were located in Times Square. So it was our own for the studio musicians, it was our own little village. There was a restaurant, like a restaurant that we all congregated at, and it was just kind of our neighborhood. Even though it was in the middle of New York and there were tourists everywhere, we didn't see them. We just saw each other. Yeah. Anyway, Ralph comes up behind me, puts on Walkman headphones. He said, listen to this. I go, oh, man, that's Bill Withers, right? He said, yeah. I said, what happened? Is this us? He goes, yeah, this is us. We recorded it with Grover. I said, oh, you got Bill? He said, yeah, Bill, wrote the lyrics, the verses, and this is killing it. And I said, yeah, man. And next thing I know, that song is on the radio day and night. It's got to be like 1981 or something like that. I'm 19, right? So maybe 1980, 79, 80. I don't remember exactly, but it was a smash. Like, you heard it everywhere. And you still hear it today. Like a couple of years ago, everyone on Instagram was doing their version of Just the Two of Us for some reason. Yeah. And TikTok, you hear it all the time. So I absolutely remember
Austin
that session.
Powers, too.
Yes, yeah. Austin Powers, yeah. So it's a great song, and Bill's verses are just so beautiful. So it was a real special moment, or, a grand moment,
Yeah. It's just part of the canon now.
Yes.
And the other one I wondered if you remembered, my favorite records in the whole wide world is the Nightfly.
I knew you were going to say Donald Fagen.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of people's favorite record.
Oh, I mean, it's just...
beautiful.
And the one I want to ask you about is Maxine, because that track is just so, like, on the grid, as with a lot of those things, right?
Yeah.
But it's just locked in, and the first digital recording and all of that.
Yeah.
But then, and it's got all these tight jazz harmonies and the vocals and the keyboards and all of that. But the way that you approach that, the way that I hear it, is you're taking a lot of liberties. You're taking a lot of, there's a lot of jazz vocabulary, and it's improvised feeling. And I wondered if that was at all a rub, when you went in to do it, or if you just played what you heard and then it was cool.
Donald Fagan, I got a call from Donald Fagan, to my answering service that we all used in New York at the time. Donald Fagan needs you. And I started getting warnings from the other studio musicians. Man, they keep you there a long time, because they have you do multiple takes of stuff until they get it exactly how they want it. And so I was ready. When I got to the studio, it's nobody else there. It's just, he had the track, and he just needed me to add bass. So I added bass on the Nightfly, the Goodbye Look,
Yep.
and Maxine. And Maxine, it was just a track. It was, like a drum machine they had called Wendell,
Yep.
which was, some kind of souped up Lynn drum machine or something like that. But it was a jazz tune, 6/8 jazz tune. So I played the take, and then one take, and then I played again because now I know what to listen for. I kind of heard kind of certain things that they do.
Were the vocals on it when you did it?
I believe so, or maybe just his voice. Just maybe a solo voice. I'm not sure about that, but he said, "Okay, that's great. Can you put up blah blah blah? Put up the Goodbye Look." That was it, and so I didn't feel like I was taking liberties. I felt like I was playing what the tune. I mean, it was clearly jazz, or at least jazz inspired, and the bass player's job was to provide foundation, but the way you provided foundation wasn't really locked down. You could move around as long as you kept it locked. So
No, it added life. It added life.
Yeah,
on
it was
that track.
it's really nice, and the Goodbye Look is beautiful too. That whole album is beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of audiophiles, at least in the 80s and 90s, a lot of audiophile places, if they wanted to like hype you up on a really expensive audio system, they play that song
Absolutely.
over
That's the test.
their speakers. And
On the Goodbye Look, I was listening to it, I don't know, a couple of years ago in the car, and I had it pumping pretty loud.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that it's like that kind of quasi samba Americano thing. And I think there's like a bass drum on the big three.
on the
big two.
the sudo, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is that what's going on there?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
It's like,
Don't
wow.
put. They didn't have subwoofers at the time, so we didn't know it was going to do that to your speakers. But no, it had that kind of a Brazilian samba feeling, and it's a great record.
Amazing. No, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Okay, and then I have to ask you about Luther Vandross. Your relationship with that music and him and that period.
Well, we were studio musicians, and Luther was a studio musician as well. Studio background vocalist, not just a background vocalist. You'd call him to call the right background vocalist, arrange the vocals, and just make your record sound incredible. That was his thing. And he did it very well. He did it for David Bowie, for Bette Midler, for Chic, Nile Rodgers and Chic. He did it for everyone. And sang on commercials because we were studio musicians. That's what we did. And, he began to notice me coming in and out of sessions because usually with these recording sessions, the musicians would go lay the track down and then the singers would come in to add the background vocals to stack them on top of what we'd done. So he'd see me, and I'm a knucklehead 19-year-old, and but one day he calls me and says, you're around a lot of grooves. Write me something, because one day I'm gonna do my own music. Well, before that happened, he was singing with Roberta Flack, and Roberta needed a bass player to fill in for a rehearsal. So Luther recommended me, and so I went in and played, and she said, my bass player's not gonna be available. Can you do these gigs with me? So I ended up in Roberta's band with Luther and Buddy Williams and Barry Miles. It was a great band. George Wadenius on guitar. Anyway, we would hang out. We were on the road together. We'd hang out, and I'm a smart ass. I said something like, singers are there to entertain the audience while the musicians are back there doing the real work, right? I said something like that. And he said, "Come to my room," right? So I come to his room, and he sits there and he gives me a lesson on singers. He pulls out Donny Hathaway, Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick, and he breaks it down like the older jazz piano players used to break down harmony for us. They said, "Look, man, the most important chords in the dominant, most important notes in the dominant chord are the third and the seventh. Blah blah blah. Make sure and they move parallel to change in the pattern of force. Blah blah blah." Luther was doing that with vocals. He's like, "Listen to Dionne Warwick, straight tone, no vibrato, until the chord changes. There's a vibrato, right? And then she goes to mixed voice, which is half falsetto, half chest voice. Very hard to control, okay? And he's breaking it down like that. And I'm like, whoa. And, he did that for me a few times, where I started recognizing. He said a lot of singers don't recognize that's what they're doing, but this, some of them it comes natural to. But I've broken it down, and that's what's going on. So I was like, ooh. Eventually, Roberta fired us because we were charging her too much money because we were charging her studio musician money. So, she was incredible, man. She said, I'm firing you, yes, but you need to be doing more than being just in my band. She said, you need to, I can imagine you don't play bass on somebody's record unless you're the producer. I can imagine you playing with Miles Davis. And I said, Roberta, you don't have to blow smoke just because you're firing me. It's cool. I can take it. She says, no, you watch. And within 6 months, Miles called me to do Man with the Horn.
Wow, Marcus.
And when we did Tutu, she called me. I said, hello. She said, Marcus, it's Roberta. I'm in Tokyo. I stayed up all night to call you at a decent hour. I told you. And she started yelling at me because I just heard Tutu. And she said, that's like 2 Geminis. That's like 4 people in the room, and she's going on and on. So, of course, I love her. She was fantastic. Anyway, Luther said, hey, I'm going to do a demo. And we did a demo for Luther. Buddy Williams on drums, Steve Love on guitar, and Luther's dear friend and accompanist for his entire career, Nat Adderley Jr. On the piano. And Luther took those 4 songs that we recorded around to get a record deal. Took him a long time, but eventually he got one. We recorded 3 more songs, I think, for to complete the album. And that was his first Luther Vandross album. And it had Never Too Much on it, and it had A House Is Not a Home. I didn't play on House Is Not a Home. I had a gig with Miles. Anthony Jackson played A House Is Not a Home, and he had just been experimenting with low extended range basses. So House Is Not a Home has this fabulous low C in it,
that's right.
And that became part of Luther's sound. So I would, when I continued with Luther, I would detune to get those notes. But it was from then on, because Never Too Much was a humongo hit, right? So all of a sudden, he's not Luther Vandross, the kind of guy behind the scenes. He's Luther, one name. And we did follow-up albums, and he and I were writing together. Clive Davis called him and said, hey, I heard you're a fan of Aretha. Why don't you produce her? And Luther asked me to come up with a track, and I came up with a track for a song called Jump to It. And he wrote the lyrics, and that jump, jump, jump to it. And that was a big hit. So we started writing together. And we wrote together, man, for many, many years. He's like my big brother. I saw him go through all the ups and downs and all the drama that comes with being an artist. Totally didn't mind being the man behind the man because of everything that he had to deal with being a public figure. But, yeah, man, I played on Never Too Much, and I played on Dance with My Father, which was his last recording. So, I played synthesizers on Dance with My Father because eventually Luther realized that I could do other things, So he started having me produce with him. That was the first step. And then, when the techno thing started happening, he asked me to put together stuff. So it was just a beautiful relationship, beautiful friendship.
I feel that very warmly. And so, I was thinking about the film scoring side of you, which is a big part of you. It was Siesta the first film score that you were involved with?
Yeah, Siesta. Well, I did a song for a movie called Bustin' Loose with Roberta Flack. It was a Richard Pryor, Cicely Tyson
That's
movie.
right, yeah.
But it was just contributing a song. And there's a song of mine that was using an Al Pacino film called Cruising. But the first one where I'm really composing for the film with the film in front of me was Siesta. But that was still more of like an artist contributing really like a personal music to a movie as opposed to, your writings and trying to be invisible, right? Like a lot of music for movies is simply there to emotionally involve the listener, to affect them emotionally. But with Siesta, Miles was a player. He was a character in the movie, so that still wasn't like traditional movie scoring. And then Reginald Hudlin, towards the end of the 80s, like 89, he came out of film school. He had heard a song that Luther and I did called Bad Boy, Having a Party. And he said, man, that song inspired me. And I wrote a script.
Okay.
And in film school, the movie that I wrote that script off of, the little short movie, got picked up by New Line Cinema to be a full production movie. So I want you to do the music. And I said, well, I don't really, shut up, you'll be fine, And he sent me the VHS tapes back in the day. And I just jumped in, got my feet wet. The first time I played him what I written, he said, that sounds amazing, but you covered up every word of dialogue. So I was.
So did you not have any time code or anything you were operating with? You were just looking at the film and going by seconds?
I think the first one we were like, play. You know what I mean? Like early on. And Lenny White was working with me on it at the same time. We had a ball. We were totally new, so there were no rules, and we didn't care about the rules, and we had a great time. And House Party, which was the movie, became a big hit. And so now Reggie's a full-fledged film director. And we did Eddie Murphy's Boomerang.
That's right, yeah.
Had a ball doing that. And by that time, I had moved from New York to L.A. And one of the reasons was because, I went out to do a Luther record, and my wife and I were ready to go back home, and Reggie called and said, hey, we got an Eddie Murphy movie. You got to stay. Next thing you know, we're spending like 9 months.
That was Boomerang?
Yeah, that was Boomerang, yeah. So I did movies for Reggie, Keenan Ivory Wayans, Jamie Foxx movies, Samuel L. Jackson movies. And then in the early 2000s, man, I got into this urban romantic comedy, which means like a romantic comedy with black people, So anything with Gabrielle Union or Morris Chestnut, Anthony Anderson's in those, I was scoring them. And it was cool because my wife and I, we have 4 kids. And scoring the movies allowed me to be home more than I otherwise would have been. And, it was cool. And I wasn't trying to sound like Marcus Miller, the artist. I was truly like just writing what was appropriate or what I felt like was appropriate for the movie. And had a good run,
Must have learned a lot in that process.
Oh, yeah, learned a lot. Ended up, a lot of my albums ended up benefiting from the fact that I had just worked with an orchestra. I just worked with bassoons and oboes, and you'd find them in my albums, And I learned about music as it applies to emotions, because people who score movies, they're really excellent at manipulating your emotions, So I learned a lot about that. Then Reggie took a break from directing and then came back. He was the head of BET for a while, but he came back and we did Marshall, the story of Thurgood Marshall when he was a very young lawyer, and it starred Chadwick Boseman. And now we're flexing. We're going to do some music with some personalities, real person. Not Boomerang had a lot of personality, but then it started to get like real movie music.
I see.
And then with Chadwick Boseman and Marshall, we opened up. It was a story from 1939. So man, I had like big bands and I had all sorts of sounds, and I was playing acoustic bass, and we had a good time. And then we did. We just finished we did a Sidney Poitier documentary, and then we finished Eddie Murphy's Candy Cane Lane, which was the Christmas movie from just last year at the end of 2023. And we used a 60-piece orchestra for that. So
amazing.
We're just having fun doing that. And we also do this show, and we've been doing it at the Hollywood Bowl for the last 5 or 6 years, Black Movie Soundtrack. And we have the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. We have a rhythm section with like Paul Jackson Jr. and all these great musicians. And we have special guest artists. We have a screen behind it to show scenes from the movie. And then we'll have Snoop come on and do something. Or we have In Vogue. We had Earth, Wind, and Fire. We have Gladys Knight, Jennifer Holliday. They all come in and sing a famous song from the history of black music. Everything from Sidney Poitier movies in the 60s, The Heat of the Night, all the way through to whatever just came out. And it's sold out. Hollywood Bowl is humongous, and we sell it out. People look forward to it every year.
Beautiful.
So that was Reggie's idea, and we thought it was going to be like a little thing at a 200-seat theater, and the thing just blew up really fast.
It's so great for that audience.
Baby faces come in, and it just makes you proud about black cinema.
Yeah.
We show a clip from a movie called Hell's a Poppin' with the Nicholas brothers, who were these two dancers who were incredible.
Yeah.
And If you ever can look it up on YouTube, Hell's a Poppin', the Nicholas brothers.
Yeah.
It will blow your mind to see what they were doing as like tap dancers, and they told me that Sammy Davis Jr. was a huge videographer back in his day, and he would video everything, and he had a huge collection. And when Sammy lived in L.A., he had an open door policy. There was always people hanging out. People always hanging out at his house. And people said they'd see young Michael Jackson, 12 years old, because the Jackson 5 had to move to L.A. when they were on Motown. They'd see young Michael Jackson coming in, just, shyly, like nodding at everybody and going into the video room to see all the history of African-American dance.
Wow.
So when you see Michael Jackson, you're literally seeing the history of the dance. Even the moonwalk, dancers were doing that to say goodbye. They tip their hat and do the moonwalk off the stage. I think it was called the backslide or something like that. But Michael took all of that stuff and just, made it his own.
That's amazing. Artists taking care of artists too. That aspect.
Yeah.
You slipped something in there that I want to ask you about. You said you were playing acoustic bass on that soundtrack. Have you always played acoustic?
Well, my double was the clarinet. You know what I mean? So that was enough to deal with the clarinet and the electric bass. But I always played the clarinet, the acoustic bass at home.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I don't think my kids knew that I played electric bass because they knew I played piano because I was always trying to write stuff, figure out voicings and stuff. And the acoustic bass. We got one in the living room, one in the TV room.
Okay.
Because whenever I'm playing, that's what I'm, because playing acoustic bass for me is like you're on deck and you're swinging 2 baseball bats, so that when you finally get up to plate, it feels like nothing.
Yes.
So, and I love the acoustic bass. My heroes were Paul Chambers and Ron Carter. Mr. Carter, who, I've had the honor, I sat in with him a few months ago with his group, and it was like an incredible honor. Paul Chambers I never got to play with, but my cousin played with him. My dad's cousin is Wynton Kelly, and Wynton they had a trio together with Paul Chambers. So I'm sure I got to hear him in person at some point when my parents brought me to hear it.
It's in there.
Hear Wynton, yeah. Well, at least I like to feel like it's in there, But I studied him. I studied him big time, because, I started off as a fusion player, funk. I started off as a funk player, soul, R&B, funk. And then I got into jazz, but fusion. I heard Stanley Clarke, I heard Jaco Pastorius, I heard these tremendous bass players in the 70s, which was like a glorious time period for bass players. And man, they told me, I said, well, I can almost play their solos from listening to their records, but I had no idea why they're choosing the notes they're choosing, They said, man, you got to learn jazz, Really? Yeah, you got to learn jazz. And I had a buddy in high school who was really into jazz. His dad had turned him on, and he became a really well-known jazz drummer, Kenny Washington. And Kenny kind of steeped me in the whole jazz tradition where I took it a little bit too far for most of my funk friends. They were like, man, why are you playing? But it opened me up, and so I listened to Paul Chambers, Ron Carter, man. And I was totally into it. But it was the late 70s, and the bass guitar let people know that it was modern music. So even jazz guys were using bass guitar. Sonny Rollins had Bob Crenshaw playing the bass, and I was doing straight ahead gigs with a bass guitar, And the band leader, I'd show up with a bass guitar. He'd go, "You gonna play that?" And I said, "Yeah," but after the first song, he was cool, So I got away with playing straight ahead and played with Jimmy Cobb, played with Al Foster, played with Jack DeJohnette, played with Billy Hart, all the incredible straight ahead drummers in New York at the time. But then the younger Wynton and those guys came through, and they really were insisting on taking it back to like the kind of traditional stuff. And I really preferred to try to make a music that truly represented the era that I'm in. I wanted to, there are no rules in jazz, but, how you get initialized is important. What the older guys say to you when you're young about the purpose of jazz, the aim of jazz. And when I was coming up, it was like you have to be able to find a style where everybody knows it's you within the first few notes. Okay, you have to take the music somewhere where if people hear it 100 years from now, they know exactly when this thing happened, you know. So that was how I got initialized. That's not the only way, you know. People who come from other areas with other mentors, you know, they say, you got to preserve the tradition, you got to carry on the tradition, which is cool. But that wasn't for me, even though I love, you know, the music. I love, like, post-bop from the 50s. I love the stuff that Herbie and Wayne and Ron and Tony did with Miles. But I always felt like, you know, my contribution needs to take into account where I'm from. You know, I need to sound like I'm from New York. You know, New York is like every influence you can ever have is going to hit you in New York. So when I was coming up in New York, I played funk, jazz, I played calypso, Caribbean, I played reggae, I played African music with the brothers uptown, I played salsa, you know, Latin music. I played everything, straight ahead, a lot of straight ahead gigs. So, you know, my music has to reflect that. You know, it's just, otherwise I'm not being honest, you know. Otherwise I'm editing. Before I play a note, I'm editing. And I didn't want to do that. So so that's kind of where I've placed myself.
Yeah, and you can hear all of those things in your music and your playing and your writing. You know, it's interesting to me because you are most definitely a musician's musician and a composer's composer, and all of these wide influences are well studied and expressed. And you also have this sense, it's the producer ear, right? It's you have this sense of presenting to the audience and serving the audience. That's what I feel from you. It's like a service. And I think there are a lot of folks that have one or the other. And you most definitely have both. I don't know if you would have a response to that. I don't know if you see yourself that way too. Or if that's something you even think about.
I know that when I first started with my own band in the 90s, I wasn't communicating with the audience at all. Right?
Really?
Just because I come out of Miles's band and, you know, he didn't say anything to them, you know, to the audience,
right.
You know. And I started doing jazz cruises, right? Michael Lazaroff, who runs these jazz cruises, came to me on the recommendation of a great buddy of mine, Wayman Tisdale. Wayman used to play in the NBA, but he was a complete music head, played bass all his life, and when he retired from the NBA, he became like a really successful smooth jazz bass player, right? I mean, with his own personality, it was incredible. And anyway, Wayman passed. But before he passed, he recommended me to Michael to maybe host some cruises. You know, so the first cruise I did was in Europe, and I had McCoy, I had Herbie, I had John Schofield, I had Gary Bartz, I had Medeski, Martin and Wood, Roy Hargrove. It was unbelievable lineup. Michael Lazaroff lost so much money on that cruise because, you know, Europeans aren't apparently into cruising. They don't really get it like Americans do. But Michael said, you're a good host. We did a Playboy cruise here in the United States with the same sort of lineup. We had Herbie there too. It was great. But when Wayman passed, Michael said, hey man, can you host the smooth jazz cruise? And I said, well, I'm not really, you know, even though I've written songs that have become like really successful smooth jazz tunes, I wrote them before they called it smooth jazz, you know, like David Sanborn stuff.
I see.
You know, we do a David Sanborn album, and one song would be a romantic, you know, stuff that David does so beautifully.
Yeah.
And then the format of smooth jazz started, and they started out with songs like that, songs by Joe Sample and songs by Bob James. None of those artists considered themselves smooth jazz because they played a range of music. They played a range of music, and it was that was just one of the kind of areas that they would go from time to time. So anyway, he said, I know, but, you know, I need you to host. I'm sure you'll enjoy it, you know. So I started hosting the cruise, man, and the people in the audience, the 2,000 people on the ship there for music, they love the music. They're so happy, and they've been working all their lives, and now they finally have some time to enjoy themselves. You know, the kids are grown, and they come and they listen to the music, and they're just so warm and beautiful, and they remind me of my aunts and my uncles, you know, and I really got into it. But Michael says, but nobody knows who you are, you know. So I need you to spend the first couple of shows just talking to them. Just play snippets of everything you've done, you know. So I had a ball. I just walk in and say, okay, I know y'all don't know who I am. Here's the first song I played, just the two of us, and they're like, whoa, and I play Funkin' for Jamaica, and then I'll play Luther songs and play David Sanborn. They go, I didn't know that. And I play Miles song, they go, how old are you? You know? So anyway,
I see.
Speaking to the audience is where I'm getting to. Speaking to the audience, I realize that's very comfortable for me, you know? And what you have to do when you have mentors is you have to, at some point, recognize that you're not your mentor. You know, you take from them what you need, but then you have to be you. You know?
Okay.
So if you see me now, I'm talking to everybody. I'm talking to French people in French, you know, and without giving up, without sacrificing the music, without
integrity,
watering the music down. One thing I do is I realized that if you're not completely into jazz, you don't know who to watch. You know, like they play the head and then the trumpet player starts soloing, and you know, you're still watching the piano player, you know. So what I did, the reason I realized it, because I had a cameraman in Italy who was a pop fan. He didn't know anything about jazz, so he kept the camera on me the whole time. So it's the piano solo, and he just got me up there. So I started walking over to the piano to bring the camera guy with me, so that he maybe get it, you know. And then I walk over to, and then I realized, you know, if you just direct people a little bit, you know, it really goes a long way. So that's a long way of answering what you said about whether I realized. But yeah, you're serving the people without, you know, messing your music up or making it like super simple, or, you know, just playing pop tunes instrumentally. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. Well, what I understand, what I perceive of that is, you know, you are you be you.
Yeah.
You know, within your own foundational integrity, but have that awareness of the other, right?
Yes, and figuring out who you are is not that easy. You know,
tell me about that.
Especially if you start off as a studio musician, where your job was to be
the chameleon,
whoever you needed to be the chameleon, exactly. So you know, you're like, you know, I can sound like this for this record. I can sound like that for this record. And then it's time to make your own record. And you're like, okay, who am I? You know, which one of these guys is me? Which one of these guys is me? And it took me a while. You know, I did a couple of albums where I was, you know, cool with the music, but I said, I haven't found myself. So I stopped. And then after Miles, I restarted with a clearer sense of who I was. It's not easy.
So, and so what's getting you lit up now? What's getting you excited, you know, I mean, you've got 1,000 million things going on all at once, but like, you know, what's that thing that's exciting when you wake up in the morning that you can't wait to do?
Man, find a note that I haven't found before. Find a chord that I haven't found before. Or find a way to elicit emotion that I haven't found before. You know, it's hard, man. You be writing and go, oh man, yeah, this is it. Oh man, I wrote this in '84. You know? You go, oh man. So, you know, sometimes you gotta change your environment. You know, change your environment. You know, if you're writing the same songs on the same piano, you know, in the same room. So you gotta change your environment and just experience life. That'll do it. You know? People say, you ever get tired of making music? You ever get tired of breathing? You know, this is what I do. This is what my dad did. This is what his dad did. So for me, it's really in the blood.
Have you ever come to that point where it's, even though you want it, but the music just kind of dies out for a minute? And
I've never been really there, just because I do so many different types of music, you know, and I'm never like in one place for that long. I think there was a period where I heard a couple of records and said, okay, yeah, you hit the same note, not the specific note, but the same emotional note on both of those albums. But for the most part, I've been pretty successful at changing my point of view enough so that the albums have their own personality. You know?
Thank you, Marcus Miller. This has been so great, and I know I said it before, but I just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for all of the music and all of the inspiration. It's truly a gift to all of us.
Thank you.
Much gratitude, everyone, for checking out the podcast. Please just subscribe and follow and like and add a comment, as it really helps us expand and grow and keep us all connected together. So I appreciate it very much, and I send you much, much, much love. I'll see you on the next one.